Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Yanis Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 12 waiver wire targets for the 2023 fantasy football season. Now, Week 11 was not kind to us. Starting on Thursday, the injuries to Joe Burrow and Mark Andrews were brutal. It continued going into Sunday. Players like Cooper Kupp, Devon Achane, Aaron Jones, Kenneth Walker, D'Onta Foreman, all going down with injuries. So over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be making suggestions for waiver wire options that are hopefully available at a variety of different positions. Available running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, quarterbacks, kickers, and defenses that are not only going to help fill in for injuries in Week 12, but hopefully help us for the remainder of the season, because many of us are going to be dealing with the bye-apocalypse in Week 13. Again, besides the injuries that we're all dealing with, Week 13 has 6 teams on bye. So interesting way for the NFL to go ahead and kind of place them all at the back end of the season. But nonetheless, many of us are going to be in situations where many of us are going to be in must-win scenarios. Therefore, besides just making suggestions in terms of Week 12 waiver wire targets, I'll also make some suggestions for Week 13 so that you can prepare for your upcoming bye-apocalypse. Before we get into talking about some waiver wire targets, a couple reminders. If you have yet to do so, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2023 season. This week's schedule of videos is going to be a little bit different than it normally is. Typically, I only have one video every single day. Tomorrow, Tuesday, we'll have our running back and wide receiver rankings video posted. On Wednesday, we'll have tight end and quarterback rankings video posted. Thursday morning, I'll be live streaming prior to the first game of the day. Of course, there are 3 games on Thanksgiving Day, so keep that in mind. I'll be going ahead and going live on Thursday morning in order to help you guys set your lineups for that specific day. Now, for those of you guys who want my rankings for this upcoming Thursday and every single subsequent Sunday morning for the remainder of the season, be sure to travel down to the description of the video and check out Underdog Fantasy. At this current moment in time, if you go ahead and use code Andrew, making that first-time deposit of $10, not only are you going to get the first-time deposit match up to $100, you're going to get my rankings sent to you every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These rankings are by position, by tier, flex rankings, half PPR, full PPR. Now, the reason why I mentioned this upcoming Thursday is due to the fact that there are 3 games. I'm going to also be sending you those rankings this upcoming Thursday and, of course, every subsequent Sunday for the remainder of the season. So take advantage of the opportunity this upcoming week and, of course, sign up today using code Andrew. All you got to do is check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on the current location. At the end of today's episode, I'll be putting together a couple pick'em slips for tonight's exciting game between the Kansas City Chiefs and, of course, Philadelphia Eagles. As of tonight, if you sign up using code Andrew, you can take advantage of the new customer special of 0.5 total yards from Patrick Mahomes, and have a great day using Underdog Fantasy. Thank you very much for all the support and using code Andrew. Okay, so let's talk about some Week 12 waiver wire targets. Beginning with our number 1 at the running back position, it is Zach Charbonnet. Now, we've been mentioning Zach Charbonnet for maybe, 5 consecutive weeks as a potential option to pick up. Despite the overall increase in terms of snaps and touches that Zach Charbonnet has had over the course of the last 3 games, really, he was nothing better than an RB3 or a handcuff. But yesterday, due to the injury to Kenneth Walker, of course, Zach Charbonnet took over this backfield. At this current moment in time, he's currently rostered in 44% of Yahoo leagues and 52% of sleeper leagues. If he is available, he has to be picked up. This upcoming week, they take on the San Francisco 49ers, and if there's going to be a chance in which Kenneth Walker is going to miss a considerable amount of time due to this injury, of course, he played 7 snaps on Sunday and didn't return with that oblique injury. We don't know exactly his timetable or the severity of said injury, but being the immediate handcuff of Kenneth Walker and the starting potential running back of the Seattle Seahawks for weeks to come, Zach Charbonnet has a lot of value. Yesterday, against the LA Rams, 15 rushing attempts, only 47 rushing yards, but got himself a lot of utilization within the receiving game. 6 targets, 6 catches, 22 receiving yards, 9.9 half PPR fantasy points. Going into the upcoming weeks, if in fact Kenneth Walker is not going to be available, Zach Charbonnet, an automatic pickup, and someone that is not only going to be a starter for our teams, but could end up having even more upside if he finds the end zone. Moving on to our number 2, we have Ty Chandler, another player that we mentioned last week. But going into Sunday morning, we were all given the information that Alexander Mattison cleared the concussion protocol, and he in fact was playing on Sunday Night Football against the Denver Broncos. So therefore, Ty Chandler was expected to have a little bit of a backseat role within this offense, and he did. He was still the RB2, but despite that being the case and having only played 31% of the overall offensive snaps, he had 10 rushing attempts for 73 rushing yards. He had 4 targets, 4 receptions, 37 receiving yards, and 13.0 half PPR fantasy points. Even though the Minnesota Vikings won't replace Alexander Mattison, despite how inefficient he has been all season long, despite the fact that Cam Akers was looking better than him at times this season, and of course, most recently, Ty Chandler taking over this backfield in the opportunities that he has been given, he has been highly efficient and looks like he's the best running back in this backfield going forward. So despite the fact that they won't replace Alexander Mattison, as long as they continue to feature Ty Chandler and give him utilization, he will be of value. They do take on the Chicago Bears this upcoming week. It is a very difficult matchup in terms of running the ball, but going forward, Ty Chandler is going to be given opportunity, and if in fact he can overthrow Alexander Mattison, he could be of value. Currently only rostered in 44% of Yahoo leagues, 49% of sleeper leagues. Hopefully he's available. If not, and already rostered from last week, I wouldn't be surprised. Moving on to our number 3, the final running back that I wanted to mention on today's episode, because really the running back position is quite thin, is Royce Freeman. He's currently rostered in 17% of Yahoo leagues, 18% of sleeper leagues. We know that Kyren Williams is going to be returning this week from the injured reserve. If in fact there's any sort of setback, you still want to have the primary running back of this team. And despite the fact that Darrell Henderson had himself the lone rushing touchdown and was able to dominate the receiving work, 7 targets, 4 receptions, 28 receiving yards, 10.9 fantasy points, the clear RB that is going to be running the ball for this team, if in fact Kyren Williams is not ready to return this week, would be Royce Freeman. Had 17 rushing attempts for 73 rushing yards, while Darrell Henderson had 6 rushing attempts for 1 yard and 1 rushing touchdown. I know that the overall, opportunity of a touchdown is going to go back and forth between these two, but if Kyren Williams is prepared and back, I still expect to see Royce Freeman get himself utilization, primarily because he has been the better looking running back between himself and of course Darrell Henderson over the last couple games. And they do take on the Arizona Cardinals, which is an extremely advantageous matchup. We just saw Devin Singletary torch them for over 100 yards and a touchdown. All right, let's move on to the wide receiver conversation for week 12. Let's talk about Josh Downs to begin. Of course, coming off of the bye week, we have the Indianapolis Colts, New England Patriots, New Orleans Saints, and Atlanta Falcons. But one of the primary options I wanted to mention is a member of the Indianapolis Colts, someone who as of late has been dealing with a lot of injuries. In fact, in the last 2 games he has played, he's only played 20 and 25% of the overall snap share. Therefore, my expectation is coming off of the bye week, we should have a healthy Josh Downs available, who currently is rostered in only 50% of Yahoo leagues. So perhaps he's available for you to pick up, taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In the 4 healthy games that Josh Downs has played with Gardner Minshew as the starting quarterback of this team, he is averaging 9 targets, 6 receptions, 69 receiving yards, and a half a touchdown per game, 13.00 half PPR fantasy points per game, being able to garner himself a 22% target share within this offense. As long as the opportunity is going to continue to go in his direction, I'm anticipating that Josh Downs continues to be a valuable fantasy option and the number 1 pickup in terms of the wide receiver position this week. Moving on to our number 2, we have Demario Douglas, another player coming off of the bye week. Of course, the New England Patriots are in a little bit of a tough position, primarily because we have no clue who their starting quarterback is going to be coming out of the bye. Regardless of who it is, we know that Demario Douglas is the primary, wide receiver 1 of this offense going forward. As of late, has been able to put up performances in a half PPR of 9.4, 5.4, 8.0, and 11.4. Yes, he is not a top 24 receiving option unless he finds the end zone, but at least for full PPR purposes, half PPR purposes, is a solid wide receiver 3 for the remainder of the year, being the number 1 receiving option of this offense, currently only rostered in 32% of Yahoo leagues. The number 3 option is Jayden Reed, a player that I've continued to preach every single week should be picked up. Only being rostered in 36% of Yahoo leagues is an injustice to the value that Jayden Reed has been able to provide for many of our fantasy teams as of late. Since week 7, he's posted fantasy production of 9.6, 10.3, 5.5, and most recently, the last 2 weeks, 16.9 and 17.2. Scored a rushing touchdown, had a couple rushing attempts in yesterday's game. Obviously continues to get himself utilization as a receiver within this offense. And as long as this team continues to pile up fantasy points in garbage time, we're going to get ourselves a lot of production out of Jayden Reed going forward. Our number 4 is Odell Beckham Jr. I know that Odell Beckham Jr. is still dealing with a little bit of a shoulder injury that he sustained on Thursday, and I understand that he has a week 13 bye, but keep in mind the last 3 weeks of production, 12.1, 10.5, 13.6, 2 of those games in which he scored a touchdown. With the absence of Mark Andrews taking place, there may be more utilization for Odell Beckham Jr. within this offense going forward, only rostered in 29% of Yahoo leagues. Moving on to our number 5, Elijah Moore. Even though he is the highest percentage rostered player outside of Josh Downs at this current moment in time on this list, 42%, you have to understand that the signing of Joe Flacco could in fact lead to Elijah Moore getting even more value. If you go back to 2022 New York Jets, weeks 1 through 3, Joe Flacco was the starting quarterback of that team. Throughout that span of time, Elijah Moore was the number 2 wide receiver option behind Garrett Wilson. He was averaging 7 targets per game. If Joe Flacco can elevate the passing attack of the Cleveland Browns offense in the absence of Deshaun Watson, of course, Elijah Moore could absolutely be of a greater value besides Amari Cooper and, of course, David Njoku taking that next step forward. The final option I wanted to mention is Arizona Cardinals wide receiver Rondale Moore. But understand, besides getting that 1 target for a 42-yard receiving touchdown, he didn't do anything for the rest of the game in terms of receptions. Didn't have another target for the remainder of the game. But the other player on this team that had majority of the overall targets was Greg Dortch. In the absence of Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch played on the outside for majority of the day and had himself an incredible workload of opportunity. If in fact Michael Wilson is not going to be available for another consecutive game, I would suggest a player like Greg Dortch, who is currently rostered in literally 0% of Yahoo leagues. It's definitely not 0%, but it's definitely lower than 1%. But nonetheless, if in fact he's available and Michael Wilson is not going to be for this upcoming week, could be a value taking on the LA Rams defense. All right, let's go ahead and continue on. Let's talk about the tight end position. Moving on, let's begin with our thumbnail of today's episode, Isaiah Likely. In the absence of Mark Andrews, there is going to be a lot of opportunity for receiving options within this offense, whether it is Odell Beckham Jr., whether it is Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers, but of course, Isaiah Likely to step up. Currently only rostered in 3% of Yahoo leagues, 5% of sleeper leagues. They do take on the Los Angeles Chargers. That is one of the more advantageous matchups at the tight end position. But let's go ahead and let's talk about the volume of opportunity that Isaiah Likely has witnessed in the absence of Mark Andrews over the last couple seasons. In week 11, as soon as Mark Andrews went down with the injury, of course, Isaiah Likely was the man to step up. He played 74% of the offensive snaps, but had zero production. In week 1, in the absence of Mark Andrews, he played 72% of the overall offensive snaps. In those last 2 games in which Mark Andrews has been absent, 52 total routes that have been ran from Isaiah Likely, 3 targets, 1 reception, 4 yards, 0.9 half PPR fantasy points in the last 2 games without Mark Andrews. Now, if you go ahead and compare that to 2022, there's a big difference. In games from 2022, weeks 8, 9, and 18, without Mark Andrews in the lineup, he was averaging 8.3 targets per game, 5.0 receptions, 68 receiving yards per game, and scored a touchdown 2 out of every 3 games. He was averaging 13.3 half PPR fantasy points per game throughout 2022 without Mark Andrews, those games consisting of 8.9, 14.3, and 16.7 fantasy points. Therefore, my suggestion, if you have lost Mark Andrews, is to, of course, put him on your injured reserve and pick up Isaiah Likely. Moving on to Cade Otton, our number 2. Again, Cade Otton has 2 opportunities yesterday of coming down with a touchdown. In the fourth quarter, 14:22 left on the clock, there was a defensive pass interference from the middle linebacker, Warner, of the San Francisco 49ers. If, in fact, that defensive pass interference did not take place, there's a high likelihood that Cade Otton comes down with the ball there. Later on in that quarter, fourth quarter, 3 minutes and 43 seconds left in the game, dropped the touchdown, clearly in the end zone, dropped. As of late, Cade Otton has seen himself an increased role within the red zone. And as long as that's going to continue to stay the case, of course, he is going to be a value. This upcoming week, they do take on the Indianapolis Colts. It's a solid matchup. And even though Cade Otton has only seen a 15% target share since week 7, he is still getting himself a lot of red zone opportunity. And that really is all that matters at the tight end position. Moving on to the final player at the tight end position that I wanted to mention, it is Michael Mayer. Again, as long as he continues to see opportunity, he's another one of these rookie tight ends that we may be able to trust within a given week. Again, this offense for the Las Vegas Raiders is not exciting, but as long as we continue to see Michael Mayer be the number 2 receiving option behind Devontae Adams going forward, he certainly will have value for fantasy purposes. Currently only rostered in 11% of Yahoo leagues and 18% of sleeper leagues. Let's talk about a couple quarterbacks going into week 12 and potentially week 13. Of course, we want to prepare for week 13, so keep in mind that teams like the Baltimore Ravens, Buffalo Bills, Chicago Bears, and Minnesota Vikings are going to be on bye week. So you will not have Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Josh Dobbs, and Justin Fields. So potentially, if Jordan Love is available, you might want to prepare preemptively in order to kind of get yourself a secured quarterback for that given week. Now, keep in mind, going into this week, if you need a quarterback, he's a solid option. They take on Detroit on Thursday. Earlier this season, against the Detroit Lions, in the first half, had 50 passing yards, 1 interception. In the second half, had 196 total yards, had 2 touchdowns, 1 on the ground, 1 through the air, and was a completely different machine. But we have seen this all season long from Jordan Love. In the first half of games this season, 759 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns. In the second half of games this season, 1,572 passing yards, twice as many passing yards, and 12 touchdowns, 3 times as many passing touchdowns in second half of games, 2 rushing touchdowns in the second half, 0 in the first half of games. Therefore, he is a second half machine. 7 of the 10 games that Jordan Love has played, he has been able to surpass 2 touchdowns scored within those games. Going into the matchup against the Detroit Lions, we have seen him find success in the second half of that game. I'm anticipating he'll play well. But going into Week 13's game against the Kansas City Chiefs, even though the Kansas City Chiefs defense has played well all season long, that only guarantees a negative game script and garbage time for Jordan Love to be able to accumulate fantasy points. Moving on to our number 2 option, we have Baker Mayfield. Of course, Baker Mayfield this upcoming week, they do take on the Indianapolis Colts. That should be an exciting back and forth matchup of a lot of scoring potential. Now, yesterday's game against the San Francisco 49ers, even though it was an underwhelming performance from Baker Mayfield, there were multiple occasions for Cade Otton and Mike Evans to score touchdowns. They dropped them. Unfortunately, that's just, that's the nature of the beast. But going into this week against the Indianapolis Colts should have himself a solid overall performance. But not only that, going into week 13, every single team continues to find success against the Carolina Panthers, and Baker Mayfield will have a privilege of taking on that defense. I would say that's probably the best quarterback that you can start going into week 13 if you're looking for a streaming option. Baker Mayfield taking on the Carolina Panthers in week 13. The final quarterback I wanted to mention is Derek Carr. My expectation is that he'll clear the concussion protocol this week. If in fact that's the case, he'll take on the Atlanta Falcons, advantageous matchup. The following week, in week 13, we'll take on the Detroit Lions. Again, if in fact the Detroit Lions can keep it competitive against the Chicago Bears, I know that, they of course turned over the ball 3 times. That's why it was competitive, but nonetheless, there's always the potential of that kind of a scenario taking place. If that'll be the case, Derek Carr taking on Detroit in week 13 is not a bad matchup. He's been solid as late for fantasy purposes when healthy. But if in fact he doesn't clear concussion protocol, Jameis Winston could be asked to step up. And that honestly isn't a bad option either for fantasy purposes. All right, let's move on to kickers and defenses. Talking about our top 3 kickers to begin. Will Lutz is our number 1, primarily because Will Lutz, as of late, has been balling out. His fantasy point production in the last 4 games, as the Denver Broncos have been able to accumulate a 4-game winning streak, 15, 6, 15, and 17. Those are the last 4 games of fantasy points from Will Lutz. Of course, needs to be picked up. Currently rostered in less than 10% of Yahoo and Sleeper leagues, taking on the Cleveland Browns this week. Matt Gay coming off of the bye week. Matt Gay has played incredibly well as of late. Since week 5, he's averaging 9.5 fantasy points per game in the last 6 games he has played. They take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That should be an advantageous matchup and a high-scoring game between these 2 teams. The final kicker I wanted to mention is Greg Joseph. Greg Joseph continues to put together great performances. Since week 5, he's averaging 9.6 fantasy points per game. They take on the Chicago Bears. And of course, the only reason I have him as my lowest priority kicker isn't because I prefer him less than Matt Gay in week 12. It's primarily because he has a week 13 bye. So if you're going to have to drop him again just to pick up another kicker later, you might as well just pick up Will Lutz or Matt Gay instead of him. But if in fact those guys aren't available, of course, Greg Joseph, a solid option going into this week. Let's talk about defenses for week 12. Specifically, I like the Denver Broncos this week, the New England Patriots, and the Houston Texans. The Denver Broncos take on the Cleveland Browns. That should be a solid matchup, especially considering how well the Denver Broncos defense has played as of late. They're currently only rostered in 33% of Yahoo leagues, 18% of Sleeper leagues. The New England Patriots, of course, they take on the New York Giants. We know that Bill Belichick's record against rookie quarterbacks is pretty solid. So Tommy DeVito, good luck. And of course, the Houston Texans taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Houston Texans defense has played well as of late, and earlier this season, they completely clobbered the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. If in fact they can do that once again, could be an exciting sight to see. Now, I wanted to go ahead and mention a couple of defensive options that you can prepare for week 13. Teams like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Jacksonville Jaguars, and Indianapolis Colts. Tampa Bay, like I mentioned earlier with Baker Mayfield, they do take on the Carolina Panthers. That's a defense that we want to pick up for week 13. The Jacksonville Jaguars take on the Cincinnati Bengals. That's another team that we want to pick up for week 13. Of course, they won't have Joe Burrow. The Indianapolis Colts take on the Tennessee Titans. Outside of a couple lucky touchdowns, the Tennessee Titans offense is terrible. Therefore, we anticipate that the Indianapolis Colts should be able to put together a solid performance against them. All right, that's going to cover it in terms of waiver wire options. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I'm going to go ahead and put together a couple pick'em slips via Underdog Fantasy for tonight's exciting game between the Kansas City Chiefs and, of course, Philadelphia Eagles. Be sure to go ahead, use code Andrew if you've yet to do so already. Make that first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only to get the first-time deposit match up to $100, but to also get the new customer special play of Patrick Mahomes, 0.5 total yards, and go ahead and start off your underdog journey the right way. So let's go ahead and put together a couple pick'em slips right now. I am really hoping that tonight's game is going to be exciting. I know that weather could make an impact on the overall game, but hopefully it's not going to be a big deal in the grand scheme. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the big plays that I really do like going into tonight's game. The last time I put together a pick'em slip on Thursday's video, both players got injured. Let's go ahead and let's avoid any sort of disaster like that. Let's begin with Devonta Smith. Like I mentioned earlier this week, in the absence of a guy like Dallas Goedert, you go back to 2022, throughout the span of games that Dallas Goedert was injured, Devonta Smith had a huge increase in terms of total targets, terms of total opportunity, and yardage. My expectation today is that Devonta Smith, without Dallas Goedert in the lineup, should get himself a higher total usage and should be able to surpass his number of 58.5 receiving yards in a game which should be competitive between these two teams and hopefully higher scoring. The last time he took on this defense in the Super Bowl was able to eclipse over 100 receiving yards. Now, the next overall option that I wanted to suggest is another receiver on this offense, one that has played just as good as any other wide receiver in the National Football League, A.J. Brown. I do expect him to surpass 6.5 receptions. He's been able to accomplish that in 6 of the last 7 games that he has participated in. My expectation is another big performance here from the number 1 wide receiver of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, the final option I wanted to mention is the number 1 receiving option of the Kansas City Chiefs, a 3-leg overall pick'em slip for this situation. I expect that Travis Kelce surpasses 7.0 receptions. I know in the last 2 games, he's only been able to accumulate 3 and 6 total receptions, but the 3 prior games to that was like 12, 10, and 9. If we expect this game to be a higher scoring affair and an exciting matchup between these two teams, I'm anticipating that Travis Kelce is going to get back to his high utilization. Probably will see higher than 10 total targets if, in fact, this team wants to win. And with a safety like Reed Blankenship typically covering the opposing team's tight ends, I'm anticipating that it's going to be difficult for a safety like that to be able to cover someone like Travis Kelce. Sure, you can probably try to lock up someone like Jake Ferguson, but you're not going to be able to do that against someone like Travis Kelce. I'm anticipating a big game here. Those are my 3 suggestions, the 3 plays that I'm going to go ahead and enter for tonight's game. Again, there are a lot of other players that you can make in regards to Underdog Fantasy. I went ahead and submitted that. Whether it is the Kansas City Chiefs, whether it is the Philadelphia Eagles, go ahead and check that out today. I like Rashee Rice potentially as like a sneaky play in terms of anytime touchdown. And I also like the potential of DeAndre Swift as an anytime touchdown. So those are the 2 that I'm like, hey, if we're just going off touchdowns, just like last week, we suggested 3 overall plays. Josh Allen rushing, Cortland Sutton receiving, and Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis was the 3rd leg that obviously didn't hit. I'm just going to, send this one in. It's $10 entry for 56.2 payout. I'm going to play this. We'll see how it goes. I'm not expecting much, but this is the sneaky play of the week. All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I'll be back tomorrow with wide receiver and running back rankings. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.